If you talk to yourself when alone, you probably have these 4 unique traits. There's something you do when nobody's watching that you probably think makes you weird. You talk to yourself. Not just a quick word here and there. Full conversations. You narrate your actions, debate decisions out loud, work through problems by speaking them into existence. And when someone catches you doing it, you feel that flash of embarrassment, like you've been caught doing something abnormal. Here's what nobody tells you. Talking to yourself isn't a sign of loneliness or instability. It's a sign of something far more interesting. It's a cognitive tool used by some of the most psychologically complex and intellectually capable people. And if you do it regularly, there are 4 specific traits you almost certainly possess that set you apart from the majority. Let's talk about what's really happening in your brain when you talk to yourself, and why it marks you as someone fundamentally different from most people around you. The mechanism behind self. Talk. Before we get to the 4 traits, you need to understand what's actually happening when you engage in self-directed speech. This isn't just thinking out loud. It's a sophisticated cognitive process that involves multiple areas of your brain working in concert. When you talk to yourself, you're engaging both the language production centers and the language comprehension centers simultaneously. You're essentially creating a feedback loop where you're both the speaker and the listener. This dual role activates your brain in ways that silent thinking simply doesn't. Neuroscientists have found that speaking thoughts aloud creates stronger neural pathways than keeping them internal. The physical act of hearing your own voice, processing information, reinforces memory formation and strengthens analytical thinking. You're not just thinking about a problem, you're experiencing it in multiple sensory dimensions at once. But here's where it gets interesting. Not everyone does this. Most people keep their internal dialogue internal. They think in abstract concepts or vague feelings. The fact that you externalize this process reveals something fundamental about how your brain is wired. You process information differently. You need to hear ideas spoken to fully understand them. You require that external feedback loop to organize complex thoughts. And this difference in processing style directly correlates with 4 specific psychological and cognitive traits. Trait 1, you have exceptional self-awareness. People who regularly talk to themselves possess a level of self-awareness that most people never develop. You're not just aware of what you're doing, you're aware of why you're doing it. You observe your own behavior from a third-person perspective, even while you're living in the first person. This metacognitive ability, this capacity to think about your own thinking, is rare. Most people operate on autopilot most of the time. They react to situations based on conditioning and emotion without ever examining those reactions. They make decisions without understanding the thought process that led to those decisions. You can't do that. Your brain won't let you. When you talk yourself through a situation out loud, you're forcing yourself to articulate your reasoning. You're making the implicit explicit. You're dragging subconscious motivations into conscious awareness where you can examine them critically. This is why you catch yourself saying things like, okay, why am I actually upset about this? Or, what am I really trying to accomplish here? You're interrogating your own mental state in real time. You're refusing to let yourself get away with self-deception or vague emotional reactions. This level of self-awareness comes with a cost, though. You can't lie to yourself as easily as other people lie to themselves. You can't just accept comfortable narratives about who you are and what you want. Every time you externalize your thoughts, you're subjecting them to scrutiny. You're holding yourself accountable to truth in a way that most people actively avoid. It's exhausting sometimes. It would be easier to just go along with your initial impulses without questioning them. But your brain is wired to understand itself, and talking to yourself is how you maintain that understanding. Trait 2, your problem. Solving ability is significantly enhanced. There's a reason engineers, programmers, scientists, and other problem solvers frequently talk to themselves while working. Externalizing complex problems through speech fundamentally changes how your brain approaches solutions. When you speak a problem out loud, you're forced to structure it linearly. Thoughts that were jumbled and overlapping in your mind have to be organized into sequential sentences. This organization process itself often reveals solutions that weren't visible when the problem was just a vague internal concern. You've experienced this. You start explaining a problem to yourself out loud, and halfway through the explanation, the answer becomes obvious. It's not that you've learned anything new. It's that the act of verbalizing forced you to organize information in a way that made the solution visible. This is called the rubber duck effect in programming, where developers explain their code to an inanimate object and find bugs just by talking through the logic. But you don't need a rubber duck. You are both the explainer and the listener. You're debugging your own thinking in real time. Your problem-solving process is multi-layered. You propose a solution out loud, then immediately critique that solution from another angle. You play devil's advocate against your own ideas. You explore edge cases and potential failures before committing to an approach. All of this happens externally, where you can track it and refine it. People who don't talk to themselves often make decisions based on the first solution that feels right. They trust their gut without interrogating whether that gut feeling is based on sound reasoning or just emotional comfort. You can't do that. Your external problem-solving process won't let you take shortcuts. This makes you slower at making decisions sometimes. While others have already chosen and moved on, you're still talking through implications and testing assumptions. But when you do finally decide, your decision is typically more robust. You've already stress-tested it against your own skepticism. Trait 3. You have a complicated relationship with social interaction. Here's something you've probably noticed. You're perfectly capable of socializing and connecting with people, but you don't need it the way other people seem to need it. You can go days without meaningful social interaction and feel completely fine. In fact, you often prefer it. This isn't because you're antisocial or broken. It's because you're never truly alone. You have a constant companion, yourself. When you talk to yourself regularly, you're engaging in a form of social interaction. You're having conversations, just not with other people. Most people need external social contact because they can't generate that conversational engagement internally. Their thoughts remain vague and unformed without someone else to articulate them to. They need another person to play the role of listener and respondent to clarify their own thinking. You don't have that dependency. You can be both speaker and audience. You can entertain yourself, challenge yourself, comfort yourself, and motivate yourself without requiring another person to fulfill those roles. This makes you fundamentally more self-sufficient than most people. This self-sufficiency often confuses people around you. They interpret your comfort with solitude as aloofness or social anxiety. They worry you're isolated or lonely when you're actually just engaged in internal dialogue that they can't see. But here's the complicated part. This same trait can make real social interactions less satisfying. When you're used to conversations where the other person immediately understands your references and follows your logic perfectly, because that person is you. Dealing with the misunderstandings and communication gaps of real conversations can feel frustrating. You find yourself thinking, if I were just talking to myself about this, we'd already be 5 steps ahead. You get impatient with the time it takes to establish common ground and explain context that you wouldn't need to explain to yourself. This doesn't mean you can't form deep connections with others, but it does mean you set a higher bar. The social interaction has to offer something you can't generate internally. It has to bring a genuinely different perspective or emotional resonance that your self-talk can't provide. Otherwise, it feels like a less efficient version of something you can do better alone. Trait 4. You experience emotions with unusual intensity and complexity. When you talk yourself through emotional situations, something unique happens. You're not just feeling emotions, you're observing yourself feeling them. You're narrating your emotional experience as it happens. This creates a strange dual awareness where you're both inside the emotion and watching yourself from outside it simultaneously. This metacognitive processing of emotion gives you an unusual relationship with your feelings. You experience them intensely, in full force, but you're also analyzing them in real time. You're asking yourself, why am I reacting this way? What triggered this? Is this response proportional to what's actually happening? Most people either get swept away by emotions without reflection, or they suppress emotions to avoid dealing with them. You can't do either. Your self-talk forces you to acknowledge and examine feelings even when they're uncomfortable. You're constantly negotiating between what you feel and what you understand about those feelings. This makes your emotional experience more complex than most people's. You can be genuinely angry while simultaneously recognizing that your anger is partially irrational. You can be deeply sad while also understanding that the sadness will pass and doesn't define your situation. You hold multiple emotional truths at once because you're processing them out loud, where contradictions become visible. People often describe this as emotional maturity, but it's more than that. It's an integration of feeling and thinking that happens automatically when you externalize your internal state through speech. You're creating emotional coherence by forcing yourself to put feelings into words. The downside is that this complexity can be exhausting. You can't just feel things simply anymore. Every emotion comes with a running commentary about that emotion. Every reaction triggers an analysis of that reaction. There's no pure, unexamined feeling. Everything is filtered through your constant self-narration. And because you're so aware of your emotional responses, you're also acutely aware when they don't match what you think you should be feeling. You notice when you're not as sad as you think you should be about something, or when you're more angry than the situation warrants. This awareness can create a secondary layer of guilt or confusion about having the wrong emotions. But this complexity also gives you emotional resilience that most people lack. Because you're always examining your feelings, you're less likely to be blindsided by them. You see emotional patterns forming before they fully manifest. You catch yourself spiraling and can talk yourself back to center. Your self-talk becomes a form of emotional regulation that happens naturally and constantly. What this all means: if you recognize yourself in these 4 traits, you're dealing with a cognitive style that's fundamentally different from the majority. You're not weird or broken. You're operating with a level of internal processing that most people never develop. Talking to yourself isn't a quirk or a bad habit. It's a sophisticated cognitive tool that you use to maintain self-awareness, solve complex problems, regulate social needs, and process emotional complexity. It's how your brain organizes information and creates coherence from chaos. The embarrassment you feel when someone catches you doing it is misplaced. You're witnessing yourself engaged in high-level cognitive processing. The fact that it's verbal rather than silent is just a difference in processing style, not a sign of anything wrong. Most people think in vague impressions and feelings. You think in articulated arguments and examined premises. Most people react to emotions without understanding them. You dissect your emotional responses as they happen. Most people need other people to think clearly. You carry your thinking partner with you everywhere you go. This cognitive style comes with challenges. The constant self-examination can be mentally exhausting. The awareness of contradictions in your own thinking and feeling can create internal conflict. The self-sufficiency can make genuine connection with others feel less necessary and therefore more difficult to prioritize. But it also comes with profound advantages. You're less likely to be manipulated because you're constantly examining the reasoning behind beliefs and decisions. You're more resilient to emotional instability because you're always processing and regulating feelings. You're better at solving complex problems because you've built an external thinking process that catches errors and generates alternatives. The uncomfortable truth. Here's the thing nobody wants to say. Not everyone is capable of this level of self-reflection. The ability to maintain a running external dialogue with yourself requires a certain cognitive capacity that isn't universal. It requires the mental bandwidth to think and observe thinking simultaneously. Some people genuinely don't have an internal monologue at all. They think in images or impressions or just direct perception without words. For them, the idea of talking to yourself is genuinely foreign. They're not choosing not to do it. Their brain doesn't work that way. If you talk to yourself regularly, you're part of a subset of people whose brains generate verbal thought automatically and intensely enough that it needs to be externalized to be fully processed. This isn't better or worse than other cognitive styles, but it is different. And that difference manifests in these 4 specific traits. You need to stop feeling weird about it. Your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do. The verbal self-dialogue is a feature, not a bug. It's the mechanism through which you maintain the self-awareness, problem-solving ability, social independence, and emotional complexity that define how you move through the world. The next time someone catches you talking to yourself and gives you that confused look, remember, they're witnessing a cognitive process they probably don't have access to themselves. You're not the strange one for externalizing your thoughts. They're the ones missing a powerful tool for thinking clearly. Don't apologize for it. Own it. You talk to yourself because your brain requires that external feedback loop to function at its highest level. And the 4 traits that come with it make you fundamentally more self-aware, capable, independent, and emotionally integrated than most people around you. That's not something to hide. That's something to understand and leverage. Your self-talk is your superpower. Use it accordingly.